Google made some headlines, both in a good and a bad way, by announcing an experimental conversational AI tool that they're calling Bard. And Bard uses Google's LaMDA language model to provide natural language answers to search queries. So think of it like ChatGPT, but backed by all the knowledge and information that Google's search engine has cataloged over the last couple decades. Now, this is still being tested by a group of what Google calls trusted testers. You can't yet use this as of today, but it should be rolling out in some fashion soon. Clearly, this announcement is a response to OpenAI and ChatGPT. And like I alluded to, there's been a little controversy around it. Google has been criticized both for a rushed rollout of the product, but as well as not moving fast enough to innovate in response to OpenAI and other competitors. So, Paul, what did you make of the announcement when you first heard of it?
First, I laugh because if I'm not mistaken, when you and I recorded our episode last Monday, we said Google's probably going to make the news this week. We thought it was going to be on February 8th, and then they rushed the announcement. I think it was within an hour or two of us recording our episode.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was hilarious that it happened. And then Microsoft came out the next day with their demo of Bing and Edge, which I know we're going to talk about. Then Google on Wednesday, the 8th, I think it was, actually did the formal demo, which did not go well. So my initial thought was, it's the first time in my life, I guess in Google's life, where they appear uncharacteristically vulnerable and unprepared. So from a PR perspective, and people who don't know my background, I actually was a public relations major coming out of the journalism school at Ohio University. I spent a good portion of my early career working in PR. And as a former PR guy, it's a disaster. Like, it's just setting their tech aside, which I still believe is probably the most advanced in the world. They just look like they have no clue what they're doing. And so that to me is like, again, I'm trying to separate the tech and the experience from the actual perception. The perception is not good at all. And then I know that they got like that, the day of the demo, they lost like 100 billion in market cap because the demo didn't go well. And Bard actually made an error that ended up being because of a misplaced comma where that was like learning the information from. But, I thought that just overall it looked bad. And then I thought that it also is just representative of how little the market comprehends this stuff. Because they showed a demo of a large language model interface, which is a flawed architecture. Like, large language models aren't meant to be perfect. They're making predictions about words and probabilities and things. And to like lose 100 billion in market cap because it got something wrong, it's going to get something wrong all the time. Like, it's just the nature of these language models. So I don't know, it's kind of like just this crazy microcosm of where we're at right now, where Google and Microsoft are racing against each other. People are releasing things that aren't ready for prime time. The market overreacts to everything that happens because they don't understand the technology really at the core of all this. They don't realize all the other stuff that Google's got going on. And it's just like, sometimes you sit back and think, this is just crazy. It's a bizarre timeline we're living in at the moment.
So that kind of raises this question that it seems like everyone's been asking. There's obviously sky high expectations. There's unrealistic expectations. But would you say that Google is behind on innovating in this space? I mean, we've talked a lot about them being essentially the creators, much of the technology that is being used in these products. Did they truly get caught flat-footed, or is this just crazy expectations and maybe rushing out the door?
I don't think they're behind on the technology. I think that would be a misguided assumption if you don't think that Google has more advanced tech than what we're seeing. They said as much, that they're basically connecting Bard to a light version of LaMDA, which is their main language model. And because if they did it to the full language model, not only would it require massive amounts of computing power, but the risks would be too great. So they're trying to kind of play the game, get something out into the market, but realistically, they weren't ready to release a product at this point. And again, it's not that they don't have more advanced technology. It's that They just weren't prepared to have to make the moves that they're making right now because of what OpenAI and Microsoft did. And that's becoming very apparent at the moment.
So this is obviously just the beginning of this technology, but we've already seen lots of tweets, thought leadership, think pieces on how these types of conversational interfaces and using large language models could impact overall the search experience. And I'm curious about your thoughts on overall search and what this could mean we're headed towards. And also, do we have any thoughts on how the impact on search could also impact SEO, which obviously as marketers is a big topic for us?
It's interesting. I watched at least clips of the interview with Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, and they asked him about this question specifically, like the impact on publishers and links to sources. And I think I saw a clip maybe where they even asked Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, about it. And I believe Sundar from Google actually addressed this as well. And right now it seems like they're basically all taking the same position of, we don't really know, like that everyone's moving so fast to get this out that they're almost on the fly trying to figure out how they're going to still reward publishers who are creating all the content that's training all the models. So again, if you're new to this, the crux of the issue is, if I go in and I ask Google a question, it can give me back a snippet, like it can give me a summary today, but generally it's still driving me to publisher links. I'm still going to a third-party site to actually gather more information. The premise of ChatGPT and what Bing is basically enabling is that I might not have to go to those sources anymore. That if it just writes me an answer and I'm happy with the answer, I don't need to go on to other sources, other, called citations. And so that's creating a lot of uncertainty in marketing and search and in SEO, is like, what is the value of published content as a brand, as a media company, as an individual, if the search engines are going to stop sending traffic to our site? So I'm not ready to say like the sky is falling in here. I think there's a lot to be determined in the months ahead. I don't even say years at this point. I think a lot of this is going to start playing out in the next 3 to 12 months. But there is a lot of uncertainty, and I think people are asking a lot of really good questions. But I don't think that Microsoft and Google actually have very good answers right now, or at least answers that people want to hear. I did hear, was it Chamath? I think that you and I both listened to the All In podcast. I think he had proposed in this week's episode, like Google just doubles what they're paying publishers. Like basically, Google just says, forget it. Like we're just going to give away the money. Like it's worth more to us to save search than it is to pinch margins. And so he had it was the best idea I've actually heard of, like, yeah, if Google, like, don't underestimate what Google's capable of doing. They're not going to just let their search business get cannibalized. So there's some plays they could make that the average business person and marketer probably isn't thinking about, because we don't spend our days analyzing Google's business model. So the one other thing I wanted to like touch on here, there's a few like tangential pieces of content or things related that I wanted to kind of get into for a moment. And that is just the understanding of how language models work, because I think there's still lots of misconceptions here. So when we're talking about Google and we're talking about Bard and we're going to get into Microsoft and Bing and ChatGPT, I think it's really, really important that people understand the fundamentals of language models and that they have inherent flaws. So these language models which power Bard and ChatGPT and GPT-3, like that's what it is, a language model, they're just making predictions about words. And I get questions about this every day on LinkedIn or in person. And so people are always like, well, why can't it cite its sources? It doesn't have sources. Like it learns from a corpus of knowledge, in this case, the internet, and then it predicts the words in a sentence. It's not drawing from any specific source. So like the analogy we've given is like, if you or I wanted to write a story about what a large language model is, like if we wanted to write an article about it, and let's say we're going to spend a week and we're going to go read the 100 best articles about large language models. And then we sit down and we write a 500-word blog post about what is a large language model and how do they work. There's a decent chance we could then write that without a single citation. Like we went and consumed a bunch of knowledge, we synthesized it in our minds, and then we sat down and we wrote something. So if you then said to me, well, Paul, where's the citations? I would say, I don't know. Like I just read 100 sources on it. Like I learned the topic so I could write about it. I can't cite for you every single fact or line within that story. That's basically a simplified version of how a large language model works. It goes out, it consumes knowledge, the internet in this case, and then it synthesizes that and it writes an article or a response to you. So to ask it for citations, you then actually have to build a whole nother layer of artificial intelligence into it that then goes out and figures out what sources influenced that response. So when Bing is actually like giving you a response and then it's giving like some recommended reading, all it's actually doing is connecting the language model to the internet. The language model gives you a response, then an AI underneath it goes and finds related sources that seem to most heavily support the output of the language model. So again, it's like there's this fundamental thing that needs to happen. Now, where we're at with these language models is very baseline. There's this great article from Rob Toes or Tows. I have to find out how to actually say his last name because he writes amazing stuff. But he wrote in Forbes about like what's going to come next for language models. And so I put this on LinkedIn. I said, basically, smarter, faster, more accurate, more specialized, and it will appear to be more human-like. And so I'll just take a moment and kind of outline the three things he says, and then I recommend people go read this. So the first he said is the models are going to start to generate their own training data. So as crazy as this sounds, these models can consume all of human written knowledge, and then they're going to run out of data to consume. So they can conceivably, if they haven't already, consume everything that exists on the internet. And as new information becomes available, they can consume all that too. So what he's proposing is that these language models will actually consume all the information, start creating original content, and then learn from their own content. So they're going to start creating content at scale to learn from new ideas and content. So that's crazy, but it's in the works. The second is that they can fact check themselves. That one's actually more simple. That's the analogy of go look on the, like write something, go find sources that confirm it, and then come back. The other thing we just saw from, I think it was Meta a couple of days ago, released a paper where the AI is actually building tools into the language model. So when it gets to numbers, it actually has a calculator tool that it launches and runs. When it gets to dates, it runs a calendar tool. So basically they're building tools into the language models that can then verify the information. And the third, and maybe the most intriguing to me, is this idea of what he calls massive sparse expert models. So if you've been paying attention to the language model space, you hear parameters. So the size of a language model is basically dependent upon how many parameters are in the model, so how big it is, without getting overly technical. So GPT-3 has 175 billion parameters, if I'm getting the numbers correctly on this. What happens right now, if I run a search or a query into GPT-3, it uses all 175 billion parameters every time. So think about the energy consumption required to get an output from it. Now think about how the human brain works. When we need to make, like say we're driving, we have to make a decision to stop or to go through a red light or a yellow light. Like, okay, yellow light, am I going to accelerate or am I going to stop? You don't pull from every neuron in your brain to decide whether or not to accelerate your car. There's like some small piece of your brain that actually tells you instinctually whether you're going to go or not. So when the human brain does what it does, it's actually only using very small percentages of the power. That's how it does everything so efficiently. And the belief is, and Google DeepMind's team has proven this is possible, that you can actually have specialized segments of the model that fire based on what the prompt is, based on what the needed output is. So rather than having to continually build these much, much larger models to say like 1 trillion parameters, there's been this rumor like GPT-4 is gonna be 1 trillion parameters. It might not need to be if they find a way to segment those parameters to be specialized for what is being asked of it. And that's a major potential breakthrough. Like that could really unlock a lot of potential with language models. So I just, again, I wanted to say that the other thing I'll end with here is Greg Brockman, the CEO of, or the president and co-founder of OpenAI, tweeted on Sunday, the Sunday morning, most amazing fact about AI is that even though it's starting to feel impressive, so again, think about ChatGPT and your experience there, a year from now, we'll look back fondly on the AI that exists today as quaint and antiquated. Equal cause for excitement and deliberative caution, important to get the tech and its deployment right. So the basic takeaway I want to, again, leave with here is what we're seeing from Google, from Bard, the overreaction to getting a single thing wrong in a demo, it is so minuscule as to where language models are going and where AI is going. And that's why I just kind of like laugh when this overreaction occurs over a single thing, or like people jump in and be like, oh, I don't like, Bing, or I don't like Bard, and it's just never going to work or replace humans or, have a meaningful impact on it. And I just think it's silly to like think. So thanks for letting me just like jump on a soapbox for 10 minutes and talk about language models.